And rain, courtesy of this really brutal-looking area of low pressure. That itself is staying away, but these weather fronts are drifting towards us. They're not with us yet. However, we still have this little ridge of high pressure, bringing most a fine Friday evening. Turning a little chilly out there, and it's not completely dry. There are a few scattered showers over northwest England, north and west Wales, and the far north of Scotland. The showers tend to fade, and many places will be dry for most of the night, but here come the weather fronts bringing rain to Northern Ireland and Wales by dawn. Before that arrives, it will turn quite cold in the east, with a few pockets of frost likely, certainly in northeast Scotland in the countryside. A dry start then across the extreme east to the weekend, but it won't last. It'll soon cloud over and outbreaks of rain will trickle in. Northern Ireland, though, should cheer up pretty quickly in the morning. Here, by and large, a fine day. Western Scotland also brightening up for Saturday afternoon. And parts of Wales, northern England and eastern Scotland will also cheer up through the day. But further south and east, it'll stay pretty glum. Not much rain getting to East Anglia until late in the day, but it will move in here. It will be quite mild, but obviously it won't feel all that mild with the cloud and the rain. That's likely to linger in the southeast and East Anglia during Saturday evening, so bear that in mind if you're heading out for a firework display, for example. Something clearer then arrives, but then so do further showers for Sunday. And Sunday is going to be a mixture of bright spells and showers, some heavy ones across the southeast, certainly initially, and then through the day we'll see heavy showers developing quite widely. Perhaps not many for parts of Scotland, northeast England, and here we'll see some spells of sunshine. But after a brief lull, the winds will also pick up, so a blustery day. It will again be mild, though, with temperatures in the south into the teens.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. As the government continues to try to get a grip on the migrant crisis, Home Secretary Suella Braverman's in trouble for choosing a Chinook helicopter to drop into the Manston detention centre. Can the Home Office afford yet another distraction? It will be the new year at the earliest before there are fresh elections in Northern Ireland. Having insisted on a new mandate last week, why is the government now on the go slow? And after Donald Trump said he was very, very, very probably going to run for a second term as president, what impact might that have on the US midterm elections? And as ever, we want your political briefing. Send us your opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. First, here's the news with Rihanna.
Arlene, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. A number of British citizens have been caught up in a hostage situation in South America. The Foreign Office says it's in contact with the local authorities, and a very small number of British nationals are involved in the incident in Peru. It's understood a tourist boat's being caught up in a protest. The Foreign Office says it's monitoring the situation closely. We'll have more on that story as it develops. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston migrant centre has fallen to 2,600. At one point, as many as 4,000 people were being held at the facility in Kent, where it's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. Number 10 says the Home Office is looking at what more can be done about capacity at the processing centre. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there'll be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February. Scotland's First Minister says she regrets delays in the delivery of 2 ferries, which are both late and over budget. The vessels are due to be delivered next year and early in 2024 at a potential cost of more than £300 million. That's 3 times the initial contract. Nicola Sturgeon gave evidence earlier before a committee of MSPs investigating their construction after Audit Scotland said there have been a multitude of failings.
Obviously, this is still a live project, regrettably so, and the Scottish Government remains absolutely committed to delivering both ferries and supporting our island communities that rely so heavily on vessels of this type on a daily basis.
2 people have been charged following disorder in Dundee on Halloween night. Emergency services, including riot police, responded to calls after bonfires and fireworks were lit on streets in the Kirkton area. A 28-year-old woman and a 15-year-old boy have been charged with alleged mobbing and rioting offences. Strike action by hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport could affect football fans heading to the World Cup in Qatar. The Unite Union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. They include ground handling and cargo staff. The World Cup kicks off in just over 2 weeks, and the union says it expects Qatar Airways to be hit heavily by the action. Kevin Hall, regional officer at Unite, says there's no point in striking if it isn't effective.
I think it's unreasonable to expect our members to be able to achieve an inflation pay rise. Because let's be perfectly honest about it, even if they were to achieve that sort of pay rise and keep their pay in line with inflation, it will do nothing at all for the cost of living crisis that is affecting them. With the energy bills, the food, petrol, it will do nothing.
Twitter continues with its mass sackings as part of its major restructuring under new owner Elon Musk. Reports suggest as many as half of the firm's global workforce could be laid off as part of cost-cutting measures. Employees have been told they'll receive an email by 4 p.m. in just under an hour's time telling them whether or not they've lost their job. Offices have been temporarily closed and the access badges of more than 7,500 staff members suspended globally as the company tries to cut costs by £1 billion annually. The King has been hosting a reception for business figures and NGOs ahead of COP27 in Egypt. More than 200 guests from across the globe have been at the event held at Buckingham Palace. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was among them after his U-turn on the climate summit, which he will now be attending. Well, next week's event comes as new figures show 205 elephants and scores of other wildlife have died as a result of drought over the past 10 months. Rain has finally arrived in the region, but forecasts show below average rainfall in Kenya in the coming months, raising fears the threat to the country's wildlife isn't over. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Arlene.
Welcome to the briefing. We start the show with a story that simply isn't going away. While the Home Office is finally reducing the number of migrants held at the Manston detention centre in Kent, it's clear that councils and local MPs aren't being consulted about where those people are being moved to. Meanwhile, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has been criticised for using a helicopter to visit Manston yesterday, while she also once again avoided direct questions from the media. Well, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, joins me in the studio. Mark, I can't really get excited about the Home Secretary using a helicopter, but other people are getting very excited about it. What reasons have the Home Office given for Suella Braverman using that helicopter?
Well, yeah, it's the latest issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
That they are getting excited about and rather critical of the Home Secretary. If this was just a helicopter trip from Dover, where she was visiting the processing centre and Coast Guard base there, to Manston, which is a half-an-hour road drive, then, yeah, that would be a tad indulgent, perhaps. But that wasn't what this was about, according to the Home Office. She was in that helicopter to get an overview of the scale of the problem that the border force and the military are dealing with on a daily basis. The military is in command and control of the Channel migrant crisis in dealing and responding to that. These helicopters are often used as part of that process. And Suella Braverman was in that helicopter, along with others, to get an overview of the areas they're coming across from, the scale of the problem that they have to deal with on a daily basis. After that, it then landed at Manston, where she met up with other people and inspected that processing centre there.
So it was actually part of what she was doing. She was going down to oversee what was happening, and part of that was looking at what was happening in the Channel. But there is all of this hysteria going on in the media at the moment, isn't there, Mark? And one of those claims has also been made is the fact that people were just brought to Victoria Station, migrants were brought to Victoria Station and left there.
Yeah, well, this is a story that was picked up by The Guardian and then followed up by lots of other news organisations, running with the line that these asylum seekers had effectively just been dumped at this station, either because of a bungle or deliberately as part of some kind of Home Office policy. That robustly is not what happened, according to the Home Office, who say that actually what happens when you come across the English Channel in a small boat, you're detained under immigration laws, you're taken to the processing centre to be processed, biometric details and the like is taken. You're supposed to be processed within 24 hours. Because of the numbers coming across, we know it's much longer than that, and very significant numbers have been building up at Manston. So you are then, once you're processed, sent to an interim accommodation in a hotel. Or the other alternative is, if you have friends and family, you can be bailed to go to friends and family accommodation. Now, this was a group, according to the Home Office, of about 30 to 40 people who had said they had accommodation arranged in central London. They clearly provided some kind of proof for the officials at Manston, and they were taken then by bus to a location that they said they wanted to go to, which was at Victoria. They were then offloaded at the coach station. It later became apparent that although the majority did have accommodation with friends and family, 11 of those individuals didn't. And as soon as the Home Office was notified of that, they say that they made urgent arrangements to have these 11 people transferred onto a hotel in Norwich. So they absolutely deny that they would ever have sent people out with no accommodation arranged, and they also deny that they have a policy of just taking these asylum seeker migrants up to central London and dumping them.
Well, Mark, you and I have been covering this story since I started on this channel, and it looks as if we're going to be talking about this issue for many months to come.
It's just continuing as a crisis to get worse, and they have a very difficult and complex task ahead of them trying to solve it.
It's not easy to solve, but I'm going to speak now to someone who might have some ideas on how to solve it. Let's speak to Mike Tapp, who's the Labour candidate for the Dover and Deal constituency at the next election. Mike, your area is clearly bearing the brunt of the migrant broke crisis. What have you made of the response so far, and what would you do differently? I think that's the important question.
Yeah, hi Arlene. I think this is a problem that you're right. This is going to drag on for some time, and we've been facing this for some time. We've now seen really the result of 12 years of complete Conservative failure. Firstly, to control the borders, but then secondly, to have a Home Office process that actually works. The numbers are through the roof in terms of those crossing, but the processing times are just far too long. We're seeing people in the system for years waiting for an answer. So no decisions are being made. So those that need that help aren't getting it, and those that shouldn't be here aren't being returned. And the Labour Party, what we would do is effectively bring in policy that actually works. So not just headline grabbing gimmicks like Rwanda and pulling the Navy into our operations when they should be hunting Russian submarines. Instead, we'd introduce a new National Crime Agency cell, which would be funded to solely look at this issue and get on top of the crime gangs, essentially making it their sole job, working with the French upstream so that we can reduce the numbers of those crossing. It'll be difficult to get it to zero, by the way, but then also speeding up those processing times so that we can give help to those that need it and deport those that shouldn't be here.
And it's interesting, I know you have a background in the NCA, the National Crime Agency, you previously worked there. It's interesting that you mention about setting something up to look at the crime gangs, because I think a lot of our listeners and viewers are very concerned, and I would say rightly so, about the crime gangs that are coming under the cover of this migrant crisis into the UK.
Absolutely. And we're seeing, people who are quite desperate being exploited by these evil criminals. So we do need to dedicate our resources to getting on top of that and smashing those crime gangs. And, we don't just have to focus on enforcement and stats and how many people we're putting into prison. We can fund intelligence cells to get ahead of the game and effectively disrupt their operations. I won't go into exactly how we can do that because I wouldn't want to give the game away, but there's a hell of a lot we can do. But the Conservatives just continue to fail, and all they want to do is push gimmicks at the public, and I think people are fed up of that now.
I mean, I think you would accept, Mike, that this is a very complex situation, and it's not something that's going to be solved overnight, as I was saying to Mark White there. This is something I've been talking about since I joined this channel way back last year, and it's something that continues to grow. I mean, a lot of your colleagues in the Labour Party would be very much pro-open borders. How do you think that works, given that what we need to do here is to secure the borders of the United Kingdom?
Labour certainly don't have an open border policy, and none of the colleagues that I've spoken to...
Some of your colleagues may have had that policy.
It's certainly not a Labour policy, and it won't be a Labour policy. I'm confident of that. Keir Starmer will not go down that route. Instead, we'll get control of the borders where the Conservatives have failed, speed up the processing so that those that need the help can get it, and those that shouldn't be here are returned. I think that the sort of open border rhetoric is something that the Conservatives throw around sometimes, but it's got absolutely no substance to it at all.
And tell me, Mike, you're on the ground down there. Of course, you're a Labour Party candidate for the next election. Just tell us how people are feeling down there, because, of course, they're the host to all of this that's happening at the moment. And I'm sure there's a great deal of concern in the local community.
There is, and we mustn't ignore that. And there's residents in one of the estates that are particularly concerned, but that hasn't been helped by the Conservatives' quite dangerous rhetoric, actually, talking about invasions and acting as if we're at war. Really, although this is an issue that comes up on the doorstep, bigger concern is cost of living at the moment, because a lot of the residents there are worried about how they're going to heat their homes this winter and how they're going to feed their children or buy them school uniforms. So yes, we need to deal with the immigration issue. And by the way, as a former soldier and former National Crime Agency officer, I'm well equipped to help do that. But it's not the only topic.
Yeah. Well, Mike, look, thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. It's been great to speak with you. That's Mike Tapp. He's the Labour candidate for Dover and Deal at the next election. Now, this time last week, we were looking at the prospect of fresh elections for the Stormont Assembly. But 7 days on, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has confirmed there won't be a new mandate this side of Christmas. While politicians may have been dreading going to the polls in the middle of the festive period, the delay means the prospect of having a working devolved government up and running anytime soon seems even more remote. Our Northern Ireland correspondent, Dougie Beattie, joins us live now from Stormont. Dougie, why has Chris Heaton-Harris made this decision? Not a huge surprise to me, but perhaps to others it is.
Well, welcome to Stormont, and behind us the building that was cleared out last week, of course, of the last remaining ministers from that legislation that was 24 weeks after they first tried to set a government in place from May the 5th. They had to leave, and that was a legal requirement. But Chris Heaton-Harris decided to put an ultimatum on the table, and if you don't use an ultimatum in so many things in life, it can usually be turned against you, and it has called into a lot of credibility into this process. He now has a real problem ahead of him in Arlene, is what does he do to put ministers back in place? He can't really legislate for it because these ministers that would come in would be from a different mandate. And if that was to happen, well, he would need to have a speaker elected behind us. They would need to nominate ministers one by one. Or does he just bypass the consent principle that's in the Good Friday Agreement and legislate for the old ministers to come back? So he really is now stuck as how he runs Northern Ireland. And of course, Northern Ireland, like any other part of the UK, has all those departments: education, security, justice, all of them that need run at any one time and require a budget. He's not going to go to the polls because he knows that it will polarise Northern Ireland even further. Sinn Féin will come back, either the largest or second largest party. The DUP will be where they are, and the middle ground will get squeezed, that of the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Party. So he'll be looking to negotiate even further with an even more hard line on either side. The only thing that is going to release the keys to the kingdom is that bill that went through the House of Commons. It is now in the House of Lords, being frustrated in there at this minute in time. But once it's back, and it must be remembered, that's what the DUP and Unionists need. That's their safety net to go back into power here, to keep the protocol and, well, to ease the protocol. The protocol's never going to go away, but there are issues in it that need looked at, because at the end of the day, the protocol is there to protect the European single market. It really is a European problem, but they have dropped it into Northern Ireland's lap, and it is interfering with the Good Friday Agreement no end, and could cause the end of this government and the Good Friday Agreement for a very, very long time.
Dougie in Stormont and Belfast, thank you. Now let's get the view of Ben Lowry. Ben is the editor of the Belfast newsletter, and he joins me now. Good to see you, Ben. None of the parties wanted this poll. I think that was very clear, Ben. But is this a case of the Secretary of State threatening unionism and then having to back out of it again?
Yes, I suppose if you were to be charitable, what the Secretary of State, Chris Heaton-Harris, was doing was that he was threatening unionists at the same time as saying that the government is pushing ahead with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, the legislation that will overhaul the Irish sea border, which is, as Dougie Beattie were saying there, is currently before the Lords. But of course, the DUP is saying that it can't go back to Stormont until it sees more of this, it getting closer to the statute books. So that's the difficulty that we're currently in.
And I was listening this morning to the Alliance Party saying that perhaps the answer is making the grace periods that we're currently in permanent. The Ulster Unionist Party is now talking about the need to trigger Article 16. Do you think the government now will be in a period where they're trying to find a solution to this with the European Union? Because it seems to me and to others that when you're looking at this, there doesn't seem to be much going on between the United Kingdom government and the European Union.
Well, of course, the problem is that the government has so many difficulties on its plate that this is not the priority that it was. And Rishi Sunak is the person who was arguing in cabinet, apparently. He's never actually admitted this, for a compromise with the European Union. It was Liz Truss who was really strong on this legislation. So that's a real difficulty. And the situation has got worse with the government, with the mini budget and so on. So this is the fear for unionists is that this is off the agenda and that they're not even going to get the things like European legislation not applying to Northern Ireland, the European Court of Justice, not having oversight, this kind of things that unionists want, which goes beyond the checks, which goes to the constitutional damage. And of course, the Alliance Party, who you're citing there, the nationalist parties, they're not bothered about the constitutional damage. They are happy for there to be less checks. And that's the easy bit. And the other thing to say about it is this. The European Union is, if they're looking at it and they're thinking, well, the government's got at most 2 years to go, there's a very high likelihood of a Labour Party coming in. Any incentive that the European Union had to deal with this in a way to the satisfaction of unionists is much less than it was. And of course, you know, the EU was on the back foot. I mean, whatever anybody says about what's happened in the last year or two, the government's tougher stand and the tougher stand of unionists definitely put the EU on the back foot. And the problem now for unionists is that the EU is not in the same way on the back foot and is quite relaxed, and it was never really inclined to make the major concessions anyway.
Well, just finally, Ben, obviously we have elections next year, the local government elections in May, the council elections. Do you think the Secretary of State might postpone the election for the Assembly until then, or do you think he'll call it before then?
The short answer is I don't know. I mean, I did begin to think last week, even before the announcement, that the government was retreating from this. I think that there was a disagreement within government. I think that there were people who were saying that this was madness. And then when I began to think that, and that has essentially been confirmed today, I was thinking, well, 6 months from now, you could imagine them having an election. And as you say, you get closer then to local government elections in the late spring. And the problem again is, what if the government, because it's got so many other things in its plate, does a deal on the protocol that is some way towards what the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill would have been, but still isn't to the satisfaction of unionists? That will put unionists even more on the spotlight. So I think unionists feel very strongly that they need the support of a government that calls itself the Conservative and Unionist Party, and that's the thing that they are hoping they will get. Otherwise, as Doogie was saying there are real questions about the future of Stormont entirely going forward.
I agree, Ben, and it's good to talk to you, and hopefully we'll speak again, because I doubt that this is going to be dealt with in the next coming weeks. We'll be talking about it for a little while to come. Thanks for joining me, Ben. So coming up, I'll be talking to Harry Quilter-Pinner to discuss his latest research into the plummeting confidence people have in politicians. But first of all, let's have a break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News every Friday at 3 p.m I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Welcome back to the show. Now, this week it was revealed that Matt Hancock would be the surprise addition to the I'm a Celebrity jungle. It comes in the same week that the Institute for Public Policy Research released a new report where they found confidence in politicians had fallen by 9 percentage points since last year. The report has also found that 2/3 of voters feel politicians are out for themselves rather than serving the interests of the country. Well, joining me now is the author of the report and the Director of Research and Engagement at IPPR, Harry Quilter-Pinner. Harry, very nice to see you. Thank you for joining me.
You too.
I was looking at a press release, Harry, from you from last December, from your organisation, and it was headed Trust in Politicians at Lowest Record on Level. That was last December, and now you're telling me that it has gone down even further. This is not good for democracy, and how can we help to change that?
No, it's terrible for democracy, and you're right to point out we've polled this same question 3 times over the last year, and it's dropped by that 9 percentage points you reference. And the thing that's particularly worrying is not just the absolute level, but it's the fact that the pace at which that decline is happening is increasing. So for context, it took 7 years for the previous fall of a similar scale, and 42 years for the fall before that. So the pace at which people are saying politics is not working for me is increasing rapidly. You wanted to know how we tackle this. I mean, clearly that increase in people saying this isn't working in the last year, 18 months, has got to have something to do with what's happening in our politics at the moment. It's got to do with the kind of sleaze and scandal that we saw at the end of the Boris Johnson administration and the incompetence around the mini budget. So we certainly have to look at how we clean up things at the top of politics, but we also have to look at the deeper, longer term trends. So this is a really long term shift. We've been seeing this decline in trust for decades. And we point to 2 big gaps that people are experiencing in their lives and in their interaction with politics. The first is between the lives that they expect to lead and the lives that they're experiencing. So for much of the 20th century, people got richer, they got healthier, they were more likely to be able to buy a house. And for many, the last decades has seen that progress stall. So we need to make sure that the economy and public services are delivering for people. And the second gap is between the kind of ideals of democracy, which people buy into, but then the reality of our politics. And I think increasingly we see people feeling that their voice isn't heard and that people that are representing them do not speak and sound like them. So we really need to give back power to people to make the decisions that affect their lives.
It's interesting you say give back power to people. I was actually going to ask you, what impact do you think social media has on this whole agenda of confidence in politicians? Because to me, it has a huge impact because people are being more scrutinised now than they've ever been in my lifetime, certainly.
I think I think you're right. I think there are 2 things. I mean, first of all, social media is such a new phenomena that, you know, the research is still catching up with how it's affecting us. So we can't say anything with huge certainty yet. But I think it's true. There's 2 things that we can say. One is social media creates huge amounts of scrutiny, as you say. Politicians make mistakes, that you're invited into their lives in a way that wasn't true before, and that kind of exposes politicians and politics to a new level of scrutiny, but also people have completely different sources of information about their politics, and it's getting harder and harder for us to ensure that that information is accurate and is truthful. So that's another challenge, is that people kind of end up looking at specific sites that reinforce their views that might not necessarily be based on fact.
Yeah. Harry, I'm sorry we're having longer to talk, but thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. That's Harry Quilter-Pinner talking about the poll that has just come out in relation to our confidence in politicians. Coming up, I'll be talking to the chairman of Republicans Overseas, UK, about the looming midterm elections and what this could mean for the US political landscape. But first, let's get the latest news and headlines with Rihanna.
Arlene, thank you. It's 3:32, your top stories from the GB newsroom. And we start with that developing story. A number of British citizens have been caught up in a hostage situation in South America. The Foreign Office says it's in contact with local authorities in Peru, where a very small group of British nationals are involved in an incident. It's understood a tourist boat has been caught up in a protest. The Foreign Office says it's monitoring the situation closely. We'll have more on that story as we get it. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston migrant centre has fallen to 2,600. At one point, the facility held as many as 4,000 people. It's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. The Home Office says it's looking at what more can be done about overcrowding at the facility. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. Unite says Qatar Airways will be one of the airlines affected by hundreds of workers striking at Heathrow Airport in the run-up to the World Cup. The airline had extra flights scheduled during the tournament for football fans. The union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. And King Charles has hosted a reception to discuss tackling climate change as global leaders prepare for COP27 in Egypt. More than 200 politicians and campaigners from across the globe attended the event held at Buckingham Palace. Among them, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, after his U-turn on the climate summit, which he will now be attending. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1313 and €1.1399. The price of gold is £1,480.26 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,360 points.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask, We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Welcome back to The Briefing. While voters head to the polls in the United States on Tuesday, it will be the first time the American public has had the chance to express an opinion on their legislature since President Biden was elected in 2020. Midterm elections are often seen as a weather vane for how the administration is faring, and people will be voting for all of the 435 seats in the House of Representatives and a third of the seats in the Senate. Currently, the Democrats hold control of both chambers, if only by a slender margin. Meanwhile, a certain Donald Trump has given the biggest hint yet that he's preparing to run for president again in 2024. Joining me now is Greg Swenson, the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Well, Greg, there's a lot going on at the moment. You saw the former president saying he was very, very, very probably going to run. Do you think that's going to have an impact on the midterms?
I don't think so. If it did, it would have already. And, yes, some impact, but he'll wait till after the midterms to announce. That's usually the customary, that's the custom. So the people that don't like Trump are probably not going to vote Republican anyway. Sure. I don't think it's going to move many independents. Independents are leaning way Republican right now. So I don't think there's any real issue. The Democrats have tried to make it about Trump, make it about abortion, make it about January 6th, but that campaign has really failed. The voters are concerned with the big issues that they're going to vote on, and those favor Republicans, to say.
I was just going to ask you, apart from President Biden and his ability at this present moment in time, what are the big issues that Americans are really concentrating on?
Clearly, number one is inflation and the economy.
Sure.
And over 40% of voters rank that as their top issue, but 77% rank it as an important issue, amongst others. So it's clearly the number one issue.
So the economy. It's
the economy and inflation, and it's always the economy, stupid, going back to 92. You also have the border. That's a real crisis, humanitarian crisis. That's number 2 or 3. And then crime, mostly in the Democratic-controlled cities, is also 2 or 3. So the economy, crime, the border, those are the big issues. Education is number 4, which historically favors the Democrats, and it's still in polling favors them slightly. But remember, Glenn Youngkin won the governor's race in Virginia a year ago, a year after Biden won that state by 10 points, and he won it on the education issue. So that issue is swinging toward Republicans. So that'll favor a lot of candidates in the midterms.
And of course, as well as the House and the Senate, there are some governorships as well that are up. And how do you see those changing?
It's looking really good for Republicans right now. It probably ends up 31 governors, Republican governors, and 19 Democrats.
Really?
And right now, the polling ensures that the Republicans will have at least half. But if the toss-ups are leaning Republican, it should end up 31-19. And some real surprises, Michigan, which, the Governor Whitmer was polling, 15 points ahead. The Republican Tudor Dixon has very little money. He's virtually running no advertising on TV, and yet it's a dead heat in the polls, which typically favors Republicans in midterms like this, where they're the opposition party. So independents usually swing to the right in midterms like this. So I think you'll see Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada for sure. They'll hold Arizona. So it'll be a great year for Republicans, and even a historical year for Republicans. Now, they might not pick up as many seats in the House as they did in 94, or they'll likely, in 2010, the so-called shellacking year. But that's because they've already picked up a lot of seats in the last few election cycles. So, for example, in 2020, even though Biden won the White House, the Republicans picked up 14 congressional seats, congressional House seats. There were 28 toss-ups. They won 28 out of 28. So the Republicans are starting with 212 right now, whereas with Clinton and Obama, they had 176 and 178 respectively. So you're not going to see that big headline number. If the Republicans pick up 30, I think the media and the left will say, well, that's only 30. The average is 28. But that's really picking up 50 or 60.
Yes.
You know, because they'll get to 240, 245 House seats. With the shellacking in 2010, they got to 242. With the contract with America, Newt Gingrich in '94, they got to 230. They're already guaranteed, according to polling, to pick up to get 228. That's with 33 toss-ups. If they win half the toss-ups, it's a historical number. If they win just 5 or 10 of the toss-ups, it's basically a Bill Clinton number. So things are looking really good.
Yeah, and I was saying in my introduction there that the midterms are obviously a weather vane for what's happening in the administration.
Always.
I mean, President Biden will turn 80 this month.
Right.
He doesn't look, to those of us looking on, to be in the best of health. He has raised the possibility of running again. I mean, surely he's not going to run again.
No. Not a chance.
Yeah.
Because even if he tried, which I don't think he will, but if he made that mistake of trying, he would be primaried. Someone would run against him.
Sure.
And that's usually an indicator that incumbent presidents that have a primary challenge from their own party always lose.
Yeah.
So he's not going to be president in 2024, that's for sure.
Yeah. And President Trump?
You know, it looks like all indicators are suggesting that he will declare after the midterms. I hope Ron DeSantis runs. In fact, I think Ron DeSantis has to run because his political capital right now is so good and so high that, he's going to win his governor's race by 10 points. He only won it by a half a point in 2018. He crushed it on COVID. He's crushing it on handling the migrants and the media. He has to run because it would be almost a waste for him not to run. So I think you'll see Ron DeSantis running, even though they're friends, and it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, that will be interesting. Greg, thanks so much for coming
Great to
in.
be here.
It's always
Thanks,
fascinating, and we'll all be watching on Tuesday and Wednesday as to what happens. Well, we've some breaking news now. The RMT union has suspended planned rail strikes after securing intense negotiations with rail bosses. The strikes were planned for tomorrow and next Monday and Wednesday. We'll have more in our news bulletin at 4 o'clock. But for me, as a rail traveller, it's fabulous news. This weekend, COP27 opens in the Egyptian city of Sharm el-Sheikh. World leaders and stakeholders will gather in an attempt to reach an agreement on how to tackle climate change. Rishi Sunak has originally ruled out attending, preferring to prioritise his domestic agenda, but once Boris Johnson announced he would be attending, the Prime Minister decided to change his plans. This afternoon, King Charles is hosting a pre-conference reception at Buckingham Palace, despite not travelling to Egypt himself. And joining me now is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker, who is outside Buckingham Palace. Cameron, who exactly has the King invited to this reception?
Hi, Arlene. Yes, well, the King left Buckingham Palace about 15 minutes ago. There were over 200 guests, actually, at this reception this afternoon, including the Prime Minister and Alok Sharma, who was the COP26 president. And then, of course, he will be handing the baton on in Egypt at the COP27 conference, which gets underway very soon indeed. Now, the Prime Minister delivered a speech within the ballroom of Buckingham Palace, where he paid tribute to His Majesty the King's long commitment to climate change and fighting the climate crisis. It's been over 50 years where the King, as Prince of Wales, used his unique position to champion action on a sustainable future. If you remember back at the COP26 conference in Glasgow, he used his speech to say we need to be on a war-like footing to tackle the climate crisis. Now, from my understanding, he was actually due to attend COP27 when he was Prince of Wales, but following Her Majesty the Queen's death, and then, of course, him becoming king, it was, from my understanding and from speaking to people within inside Buckingham Palace, a unanimous decision between the palace and Liz Truss's government that it wouldn't be appropriate for the King to attend the COP27 conference in Egypt as his first overseas trip as our sovereign. Now, Buckingham Palace says the King's focus today was very much on this reception, which he hosted with over 200 guests, hosting business leaders. He was hosting politicians, non-profit organisations, as well, exploring ways that how the public and the private sector can work together to try and combat some of these climate issues. And that's actually, he launched what's called the Sustainable Markets Initiative in 2020 when he was Prince of Wales, which was all about bringing the private sector and public sector together in order to combat the climate crisis. So that was very, very much a theme here this afternoon. Now, as we know, Rishi Sunak has done a bit of a U-turn. He originally wasn't going to be going to COP27. He now very much is. And a Downing Street spokesperson yesterday actually said that if Rishi Sunak had been in power earlier, then it would have perhaps been feasible for the King to attend COP27 in Egypt. But the spokeswoman went on to say yesterday that it's just logistically not possible now for the King to attend at such short notice. Of course, Liz Truss's government, as I said, made a unanimous decision with the palace, which Buckingham Palace reiterated today, that the King would not be attending COP27. Now, Alok Sharma, as I said, was here. He'll be handing over his baton, and Rishi Sunak delivered a speech and will be attending COP27 in Egypt. But as for the King, he has left Buckingham Palace this afternoon and will not be going to Egypt for the climate conference.
And Cameron, environmental matters, sustainability are obviously still very high on His Majesty the King's agenda. He's just doing things now in a different way because he's now the sovereign. And surely that is to be respected by everyone.
Oh, it certainly is. I think he's very much aware that now that he is king, he has to be very careful what he says in public, particularly around subjects such as climate change. But by hosting this reception here and bringing experts together in one room, perhaps he thought that it was a chance to create some kind of change, but allowing others to do it himself, and do it themselves even. And if you look at the King's son, the Prince of Wales, Prince William, he still very much is tackling the climate crisis, sustainability, the illegal wildlife trade. He attended a evening earlier this week, which was all about tackling the illegal wildlife trade with the charity Tusk. He's got his Earthshot Prize in early December. Of course, the finalists of that Earthshot Prize, which is all about trying to find ways in which to repair the planet over the next 10 years. Those finalists, which are all going to be receiving, well, the winners will be receiving a £1 million prize each in early December. That conference is going to be hosted in Boston in early December. So those finalists were announced today, and the Prince of Wales and the Princess of Wales are going to be attending that. So climate change still an issue very much clearly important to the royal family.
Cameron, as ever, on top of everything, thank you so much for joining us from a dull Buckingham Palace. Obviously, the weather is changing outside. Well, joining me now is the director of the Conservative Environment Network, Sam Hall. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously, first of all, the Prime Minister wasn't going to COP27. Now he is going to COP27. He looked very comfortable at that reception, speaking about the issues. What do you expect him to be saying when he travels to Sharm el-Sheikh for the big conference next week?
Well, I think it's very welcome that the Prime Minister has decided to lead the UK delegation to COP27. As we've just heard, the UK is still the COP president for another couple of days, and it's great to see that the Prime Minister will be handing over formally the COP presidency to Egypt, who are going to take over the COP presidency from the UK. I expect in terms of his message, there'll be kind of two key elements to it. Firstly, obviously, we continue to see the impacts of climate change get worse. We've had awful floods in Pakistan and many other impacts around the world. A recent UN report showed that the world is still not on track to meet the temperature goals that were agreed in Paris in 2015. So we need to see countries increase their ambition in terms of how much climate action they're willing to take. But I also expect that the Prime Minister will highlight the energy crisis, the fact that we're seeing energy prices shoot up, not just in the UK, but around the world. And the root cause of that is the price of gas, the fact that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has cut off gas supplies to Europe and elsewhere. That's forced up the prices. And I think the COP is an opportunity to accelerate the deployment of clean energy, which can help bring people's bills down, get us off gas, which is the cause of much of the inflation and economic troubles that we're seeing.
So you mentioned the context there, Sam. I was going to ask you about that. Given that we have held the presidency during this very difficult period, the war in Ukraine, the increase in our energy prices, looking for sustainability in our energy markets, what do you think we've achieved during that year of the presidency of COP before we hand it over to Egypt next week?
I think it's been a successful presidency of the COP process. At the very start, when the UK took it over, something like 30% of world GDP was covered by net zero targets. Now it's over 90% of world GDP. So that's a big increase in the number of countries that are matching the UK's commitment to effectively eliminate our greenhouse gases emissions by the middle of the century. There have also been deals that the UK has helped broker, for example, ending deforestation by 2030 and getting a big package of finance to help the countries with large forests still intact to shift away from the agricultural practices and other unsustainable practices that are driving that. Deals around cutting methane emissions, deals around getting new breakthrough technologies that we're going to need to meet our climate targets funded at the early stage of research and development. So I think there has been a lot of progress. Now, as I said earlier, we're still not on track to meet our targets. These processes are very difficult. You've got to get complete agreement to get anything in that final text at the end of the 2 weeks of the COP. So, it's difficult to get countries with lots of different interests and lots of different perspectives to come together. So I don't think the UK has achieved everything it would have hoped to have achieved, but I think we have taken a big step forward under UK leadership. And, I think the UK has been able to celebrate the excellent record that it has achieved on climate change. We've almost halved our emissions since 1990 at the same time as growing our economy. We've shown that you can be both prosperous and grow your economy and be greener at the same time. And I think that message is so important as we look to get developing countries to embrace the climate action that we need.
I suppose, Sam, finally, some of the critics of the COP process and of net zero would say that, yes, it's all very well for us leading in terms of what we do on climate change here in the UK, but it's what other nations are doing around the world that is important because they have a huge output in relation to fossil fuels. But I was just looking at Africa and indeed the fact that Egypt is planning their first nuclear power plant. Are other countries around the world now grasping the initiative in terms of needing to change their ways and to embrace new technologies and to deal with this in a joined-up manner?
I think they are. I think more and more countries are recognising the need to tackle climate change, and that's shown in the fact that more and more countries are setting these net zero targets. Obviously, setting a target is one thing, actually delivering it and meeting it is another. And I think to do that, we have to recognise that lots of developing countries don't have the vast pools of capital and financing to be able to build the renewable energy infrastructure, the nuclear power stations, the electric vehicle charging networks that they're going to need if they're going to hit net zero. Which is why I think another key thing that is going to have to come up at this COP, and which we made some progress on again in Glasgow last year, is financing, is getting countries to put some of their international development budgets into helping these developing countries not only access the technology and finance the green infrastructure they'll need to reduce their emissions, but also adapt to the levels of climate change that we already know are coming and are happening because of the emissions that are already in the atmosphere. So yes, I think developing countries do want to move in this direction. I think they see an economic opportunity as well to develop these technologies, to manufacture them, potentially to export them around the world. But I think as developed countries, if we want to see that progress, we want to unlock more agreement, we do have to come forward with more finance. And I should say that the UK, I think, is doing way more than most countries. We doubled our international climate finance a few years ago under Boris Johnson. I think we've got a strong story to tell on that, but we need other countries to go further as well and to maintain our commitment.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for joining us and bringing us that news today about the Climate Change Conference. Thanks for joining us. Well, a reminder of our breaking news. The RMT union has suspended planned rail strikes over the next few days following intense negotiations with rail bosses. The strikes were planned for tomorrow as well as next Monday and Wednesday. More coming up very shortly on our news bulletin. But that's it for the briefing for this week. The show is back every Friday at 3 p.m. Up next on GB News, it's Nana Kuya. But before that, let's have the news and weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Many of us having a fine Friday, but tomorrow will bring something different, much more cloud and outbreaks of rain, although it will brighten up in many places by the afternoon. The cloud and rain courtesy of this really brutal looking area of low pressure. That itself is staying away, but these weather fronts are drifting towards us. They're not with us yet, however, we still have this little